Hello, everyone. In this video, you're going to see a very short but extremely instructive attacking game. White delivers checkmate in just 14 moves, but the interesting part is that the final checkmate is actually prepared several moves earlier. We'll follow the game from White's perspective and see how a simple pawn advance completely traps the Black king. White begins with e4 and Black responds with e6, entering the French defense. Instead of developing a knight immediately, White brings the queen to h5, already showing aggressive intentions toward the Black king. Black responds with knight to f6, attacking the queen and developing a piece at the same time. White retreats the queen to f3, keeping it active and continuing to look toward the kingside. Black plays d5, challenging the center, but White immediately advances the pawn to e5, gaining space and forcing the knight to move. The knight retreats to e4, occupying an advanced square in the center. White responds with d3, supporting the center and preparing to develop the remaining pieces. Black brings the knight to c5, and now White begins something very important. b4. This move attacks the knight and gains space on the queen side. Black has to move the knight again, and it retreats all the way to a6. White continues with a3, supporting the b4 pawn and making it difficult for the knight to find a useful square. Black develops with bishop to e7, and White now continues with d4, strengthening the center and preparing to develop the rest of the army. Black castles kingside. And this is where the position becomes interesting. Because Black has castled, the king is supposedly safe. But when a king castles, the pawns around it become extremely important. The pawns on f7, g7 and h7 are now the king's shield. And White has already placed the queen on f3, where it is pointing directly toward the kingside. White now plays h4. At first, this move might look completely harmless. But White has a very clear plan. The pawn is going to advance toward the Black king. Black develops the knight to c6, and White continues with c3, reinforcing the center. Black now tries to challenge White's advanced pawn with f6. White responds with h5. And now the attacking plan becomes much clearer. The pawn has reached h5 and is only one step away from h6. Black captures the pawn on e5 with f takes e5. White doesn't waste time trying to recover the pawn. Instead, the queen moves to g3. And this is an important moment. The queen is now positioned directly beside the Black king's pawn structure. Black continues with e takes d4, capturing the pawn on d4. And now we reach the critical position. Let me ask you a question. What would you play here as White? You could try to develop another piece. You could capture the pawn on d4. You could even move the queen again. But White has something much stronger. The pawn on h5 is ready to advance. And White plays the move. h6. This is the move that changes everything. The pawn reaches h6 and immediately creates a deadly threat around the Black king. Now notice something very important. The Black king is sitting on g8. The pawn on h6 controls g7. And the queen on g3 is already attacking the g7 square. This means that if White can capture the pawn on g7 with the queen, the Black king may have nowhere to escape. Black has to react. Instead of addressing the real danger, Black plays bishop to h4, attacking the White queen and trying to interfere with the attack. But this is exactly what White was waiting for. The queen doesn't need to retreat. White simply plays. Queen takes g7. Checkmate. The game is over. Now, let's understand why this checkmate works. The queen on g7 is protected by the pawn on h6. So Black's king cannot simply capture the queen. The pawn on h6 also controls the g7 square, making the queen's position completely safe. The queen controls the important escape squares around the king. And because Black's own pieces are blocking the remaining escape routes, the king has nowhere to go. What makes this game so instructive is that the checkmate wasn't created by the queen alone. It was created by the cooperation between the queen and the pawn. The queen was already active on g3. The pawn advanced from h4 to h5 and finally to h6. And once that pawn reached h6, the entire structure around the Black king collapsed. This is something you should always look for when attacking a castled king. Don't just look for checks. Look at the escape squares. Ask yourself where the enemy king can run. Then ask yourself whether one of your pawns can take those squares away. That is exactly what happened here. The move h6 doesn't give check. It doesn't win material. It doesn't even attack the king directly. But it takes away the king's escape square and prepares the queen's final invasion. And after black plays bishop to h4, white doesn't hesitate. Queen takes g7 checkmate. 14 moves. No complicated sacrifice. No long combination. Just a queen, a pawn, and a completely trapped king. So the next time you attack a castled king, remember this game. Sometimes the strongest attacking move isn't a check. Sometimes it's simply the move that takes away the final square your opponent needs to survive. And in this game, that move was h6, followed by the beautiful finish, Qh7 checkmate. If you enjoyed this short attacking masterpiece, leave a like and subscribe for more chess games and tactical ideas. Thanks for watching, friends.